Vatican City. Within this enclave of 109 acres in Rome resides a supreme pontiff, His Holiness Pope Paul VI, the 261st successor to St. Peter. Established through a treaty with Italy in 1929, Vatican City houses the Holy See, the supreme directive organ of the Catholic Church, and the largest church in the world.
I feel in this place that this is really hallowed ground, because I see here the great tradition, Father, that has made you what you are. I have learned, I've gone a great deal from the time that I remember when the word Christ and Christian were utterly anathema to me, where they were symbols of fear, symbols of tragedy, symbols of persecution. And here to stand here, after Pope John of blessed memory opened the windows of the church on the world and gave us all a better insight into what the church represents and is trying to do, and what I have experienced since I've been here on this visit, meeting with the group on interfaith activities and realizing how serious they are, how earnest they are to try to get us to understand them, how they're willing to admit the mistakes that they have made, and how they are willing to recognize that we are all really brothers in spite of our differences in theology, that we are striving for the same goal. And so standing here in the center of Christendom, I feel very much at home.
The Basilica of St. Peter. Vatican City boasts two other churches, a radio station, 4 post offices, a court of law, a railroad station, 2 jails, 4 newspapers, 4 military barracks, and a population of slightly over 1,000 citizens. Tonight's challenge, filmed in and near Vatican City, features Rabbi Raphael Levine of the Temple de Hirsch, Dr. Robert Fine, pastor of the First Free Methodist Church, and Father William Tracy, pastor of the Church of St. Michael's in Olympia, Washington.
The challenge panel has just arrived in Rome from Jerusalem. Over 1900 years ago, another traveler arrived in Rome with news of a most unusual nature about an event that had happened in Jerusalem. It concerned the crucifixion of a young Jewish man, Jesus Christ, by the Roman authorities in Jerusalem. But there was something different about this crucifixion. For the people who came to Rome from Jerusalem told that this man had been seen alive several days after he had been crucified and put to death. The news spread. Other eyewitnesses of the life and death of Christ arrived from Jerusalem. As the numbers increased, Imperial Rome decided that the followers of the crucified Christ, who declared he was the Messiah and refused to acknowledge the emperor as God, were a threat to the state. And so they launched the first of 10 persecutions against those followers of the Christ who are called Christians. They survived, and at the beginning of the 4th century, the emperor himself was a Christian. In fact, Christians made Rome a new Jerusalem by acknowledging the Bishop of Rome as the chief authority, and his title Pope means Father. Through donations of land, the Pope gradually became not only a spiritual ruler, but a ruler of an area in central Italy called the Papal States, a situation which was not good for church or state. These states were seized by Italian patriots in 1870, and in 1929, Benito Mussolini signed a treaty with the Pope, allowing him an area of about 100 acres in Rome as an independent state, thus guaranteeing his neutrality in time of war and his independence as head of a worldwide society of believers. Rome and Jerusalem have much in common. On the streets of Jerusalem, you can meet people from all over the world, from all races, united through a common faith in God. In Rome, you can meet students and pilgrims from all over the world, united in a common faith in the Son of God, in Jesus Christ. Here in Rome, Pope John reminded Christians, Protestants and Catholics, that the areas of agreement that they had were more important than the areas of their differences. And here in Rome, in 1965, the Catholic bishops of the United States, of the whole world in fact, endeavored to chart a new era in Christian-Jewish relations, expressing the wish that Jews and Christians learn to know one another, that the growing respect, that they study the scriptures together. And so, joining me here on Vatican soil is Rabbi Levine and Dr. Fine. Adjacent to the area where we stand was the Stadium of Nero, where Peter, the leader of the followers of Christ, was put to death by the Emperor Nero about the year 64. His body was buried in a cemetery beneath the building you see directly in front of you. In the 4th century, the first Emperor Constantine built a church over the tomb of Peter. Eventually, in the 16th century, the present church, designed by Michelangelo, was built over the tomb of Peter, the first pope or head of the Christian church. The collection of funds for its building unleashed resentment among Christians in Germany, and eventually, under Luther, led to a break with Rome. Now, Dr. Fine, when we were on our journey to the Holy Land, we stopped at Caesarea Philippi, and we read that 16th chapter of St. Matthew. In fact, you read it. You are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. Would you care to share with us here how you see this text of Scripture? Because I think we have a fundamental difference here.
Well, I'm sure that we do, but I recall that vivid experience at Caesarea Philippi. It was indeed inspiring. As a matter of fact, Jesus was a wonderful psychologist because he made great use of the places. And this place, Caesarea Philippi, had great meaning because here great and famous men had come. It was named for Philippus, the son of Herod. It goes back to Canaanitish worship. It was called Paneas. And here at this very spot, Jesus answers the crucial question, which is, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And then it was that Peter said, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God, and on this rock will I build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Now, the fundamental difference is that Protestants hold that the rock was not Peter himself as a person, but the rock was the faith that Peter had just declared. Upon this rock of your faith in me as the Son of God, I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. It's really rather wonderful to think that a Catholic priest and a Protestant minister can talk about this on this very spot, here at the grave of Peter. It has deep meaning because it leads us beyond the personality of a man to the great reality, you see, the facts. And it leads us to go beyond our theological differences to the basis of understanding, which has to do with Jesus Christ, you see.
I think
at that point we can agree.
That's right. And I think in spite of these fundamental differences, because as you stated,
Yes.
the Catholic position is to see Christ not only expressing faith in the church there, but that pointing somewhat to Peter, saying
Yes.
that he exercising central governing authority.
I should add one thing. I think that Protestants agree that Peter was a natural leader of the apostolate, and we revere him, we appreciate him, we think of him as being an apostle of great importance, one that Jesus chose for some tasks.
Well, I think, Rabbi, I'd like to turn to you now. Here you are standing on the soil of Vatican City. As a rabbi, how do you feel?
Well, Father, before I tell you how I feel about this standing here, I want to explain to our audience in America who see you, both of you without coats, with uncovered heads. They see me with my head covered and bundled up, and they'll wonder whether I have the respect for this place that you gentlemen have. The fact is that I'm just recovering from a cold, and therefore I've got to be a little careful. It's rather windy out here. Anyway, I feel as though I am not a stranger here anymore, as I would have felt 10 years or 12 years ago.
Well, thank you, Rabbi, very much. We are now here on the roof of the North American College, which is located on a Janiculum hill, looking down on St. Peter's in the Vatican. This morning, the three of us had an hour-long visit with some of the Vatican officials in the various secretariats, those dealing with Christians and non-Christians. And they explained to us some of the policies being pursued since Vatican II when these secretariats were established. How did you feel about that interview this morning, Rabbi Levine, with these various officials from the Vatican?
Well, I felt that it was one of the highlights of our visit to Rome. As a matter of fact, when I heard the different members of the different secretariats, those concerned with non-believers, as they put it, that is, those who do not have any belief in God, and with those who were concerned with the Roman Church's relationship with non-Christians, in which I was particularly interested, I was amazed at what they were trying to do and the attitude which they expressed. For example, when I heard Father McGinn, who is with the Secretariat concerned with non-Christian relationships, admitting publicly the mistakes that the Church had made in the past and how they were ready to recognize as the result of Vatican II and the windows that Pope John opened upon the world for the Catholic Church and enabled the world to look in upon the workings of the Catholic Church and its ideas. I frankly confess that I never thought I'd live to see the day to hear statements of that kind. And I felt the deep sincerity of the people involved in these various secretariats, that it was not a gimmick, as so many people thought, even among some Catholics who thought that this was a more sophisticated way of winning converts to the Church. Yeah. This was not at all what they were trying to do. They were trying to interpret the Church to these people and to try to understand those people, to learn from them, as he said, which was something that I never expected a Catholic priest to say publicly to anybody.
In other words, it's not just a carrot to bring them in.
No, sir. It was. I certainly felt the deep sincerity of the whole morning experience, and that's why I say it was one of the highlights of my visit to Rome this time.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. Dr. Fine, how did you feel in regard to that interview today?
Well, I think I was particularly impressed with the words of Canon Purdy of the Secretariat for the Promotion of Christian Unity. And I was particularly interested in the term promotion, which shows that it's an ongoing thing. It's an effort not to convert, but an effort to actually sincerely, as Rabbi says, promote unity. This, to me, was very revealing. I understand that this was formed in 1960 and therefore was strongly associated with the Vatican Council. And it's a continuation of all that Pope John wanted to see accomplished. As a matter of fact, he, of course, was responsible for the forming of this secretariat. I was interested also to learn of the progress that has been made, the actual statements that have been brought into being with other communions, Protestant communions. For instance, with the Reformed Church, the Anglican Church, the Methodist Church, and even some effort is being made, and some conversations have already been carried out with the Pentecostal group.
That was a very interesting.
It was interesting to learn that right in the North American College here, prayer groups have been formed for some time, and that the Pentecostal movement has at least has made some inroads into these groups in a very sincere way.
I was particularly impressed by Father Abbott because he's in charge of that department, primarily in working for a common Bible, and the Pentecostals were very interested in bringing the Bible to others, and this became a kind of a common ground with which they were able to start this dialogue that is continuing.
I also was, of course, interested from my point of view as a Methodist in the statement of Canon Purdy with regard to the distinctive of Methodism and its emphasis upon holiness, together with the Anglican communion. Although we do not thoroughly embrace the Pentecostal movement, here was a recognition of a distinct movement within the church.
You know what I felt when I was listening to this discussion? And remember, we mentioned it to...
I'd like you to share those thoughts with us now that you mentioned your reactions to the discussion generally this morning, as far as, say, young people are concerned and what it's doing for religion.
Well, I felt, and I think I mentioned to them at the time, that what we have been trying to do in Seattle, in our challenge program, is really trying to carry out what they are doing here. And I felt that, in a sense, we were sort of an outpost of the Secretariat for Interfaith Activities in Seattle. And I was really pleased when Father McGinn said that when we get back, we should try to include not only Protestants and Jews in this interfaith group, but the people of other faiths like Hindus and Buddhists, and we have so many of them as students in the University of Washington, and the Muslims too, so that the whole concept of unity in diversity would be spread throughout the religious world, not merely the three faiths that we have been accustomed to think of.
I thought that was interesting in view of the fact that we just discussed that earlier on our trip, that we should include some Buddhists and others on our challenge program. Is there any other reaction to Rome that you have in your travels here the past few days, Dr. Fine?
I think that, of course, I'm thrilled just with Rome itself and all that it means, the eternal city, its vast history and its lovely monuments and positions. To me, it's thrilling to just sit here and see St. Peter's in the distance and look out over these hills. It's a lovely, lovely scene and speaks to us in a very fine way. One thing I appreciate about the Catholic Church is that it has preserved for society tremendous riches in art and culture, and for which we can be thankful profoundly.
During the brief stay of our challenge tour in Rome, we have found a most helpful friend to guide us around in the person of Father Germain White, the priest from St. Martin's Abbey in Olympia, Washington, who has been here for the past several months doing special studies in Rome. Father Germain, would you please tell us about your studies here in Rome and your impressions?
Certainly. I've been in Rome since October, and I am presently studying at the Pontifical Biblical Institute, which is here in Rome. I'm taking, at the present time, Hebrew and Greek in preparation for biblical studies, and upon my return to St. Martin's, I intend, of course, to teach Scripture at the school. My impressions of Rome are, first of all, a tremendous respect for the history that has occurred here in the past 3,000 years. One could not come here without realizing the tremendous amount of things that have happened here, not only in terms of Christianity, but in terms of the history of the world generally. But particularly in terms of Christianity, Rome is an important city. Both St. Paul and St. Peter died here, and many, many pilgrims, many Christians and non-Christian pilgrims have come to this great city. You cannot be here without a tremendous reverence for and appreciation of what has gone before us. Something that I think is enormously important in our day. If we're going to, for example, if we're going to have a renewal of ecumenism, of understanding among churches, it's extremely necessary to understand history and to understand what was gone on in the past.
So you feel that this gives you a wider vision of the church because of
really does. The universality of the church, the universality of mankind. You see them. You see people from all over the world on the streets. People of all different kinds of languages.
You're staying at San Anselmo's in Rome. What is San Anselmo's?
San Anselmo is a student house. It's also a college for Benedictine students throughout the world. It's an international house, and there, of course, especially is a little microcosm of what you experience at large in the city of
Do you
Rome.
have students from all over the world there at
From
San
all over
Anselmo's?
yes, from all over the world at San Anselmo.
It must be quite an honor to direct the choir there as you're doing.
It is, yes, it is.
To
We still use the Gregorian chant there that's used for a number of centuries in the church, and it's really wonderful.
Do you have any favorite places here in Rome? I'm sure that you have visited most of the churches. Are there any favorite churches or locations of yours in the 6 months you've been here?
One especially for me is the Church of San Clemente. It's a little church. It's not usually a church that's shown to tourists because it's not well known particularly, but it's a church which dates back to the 1st century, I should say. Some of the church does, because it's actually 3 churches built one on top of the other, and you can actually go back to the 1st century when you go down into the lower levels of the building.
Yeah, well, I think that you have been not only helpful to us in sharing your knowledge of Rome and its streets and places, but in sharing these insights with us, which are certainly a great privilege in being able to come here.
Thank you.
There have been some 261 popes in the course of history, and probably one of the most beloved would be Pope John the 23rd. Dr. Fine, would you agree with that statement?
Yes, I think that I would. As a matter of fact, yesterday morning I went to St. Peter's and went to the tomb of Pope John the 23rd and spent some time there alone thinking about him and his life and his influence not only upon Catholics but upon Protestants. And I feel that it was a very wholesome influence. Here's a man who really opened the door of the church for Protestants and other groups. I suppose one of the great things about Pope John was his humanity. He had the ability to humanize the office of the Pope so that people, Protestants particularly, no longer regard it as almost the fearsome thing that it was before, because they know that here's a man who was a peasant type, a man with a great sense of humor, a great love of life, who graced this particular place here. This to me is significant, I think, in the life of the church.
I think that Dr. Fine expressed a good deal what I feel about what Pope John has meant, not only to the Catholic Church, but to all mankind, really. He was the beloved Pope because he was essentially, as Dr. Fine said, a wonderful human being. He understood people. He loved people. He exuded that love. Even if you look at his statue in the Vatican, you can actually see that outgiving love expressed in the face, a marble face, but it expresses all those things that we have come to regard as the warmth, the humanity, the friendship, the outgiving concern for all human beings. And of course, the fact that he opened the windows for the Catholic Church upon the world and gave the world an opportunity to look into the Catholic Church, I think has been one of the greatest things that could have happened in our 20th century. Because I think that the one thing that we needed was to get this great church in Christendom to give us a sense of its essential humanity, which had been hidden by all the restrictions that had been imposed both within and without in relation to non-Catholics. He opened those doors for all of us. And I think it has been a source of enrichment. And I, speaking as a Jew, feel that I owe a tremendous debt to Pope John The very fact that we are here today doing this kind of a program would have been impossible without what Pope John did in laying the foundations for understanding and opening the hearts of all of us toward each other.
Doesn't this kind of say that really the way we can move toward understanding may not be through any kind of theological dictum so much as a man who expresses what the Christian faith really means, you see?
Actually,
it's the warm human relationship.
He was
that
the
really count.
symbol of what we mean by God being a God of love who expresses himself to human beings whose life is an example of the loving human relationship. Pope John was that example.
That's true.
Well, thank you, Rabbi, very much. The empty tomb of Christ had as his first visitor on Easter Sunday morning Peter, who became convinced of the resurrection and joined his comrades in going out to tell the whole world about it. He arrived in Rome and was put to death, an obscure Galilean fisherman who is now called the first pope, on the very spot near where we stand. And over his tomb is the largest church in the world. You can also see, and we have visited, the tomb of the 261st successor of Peter, the beloved John the 23rd. Perhaps the secret of his success that Rabbi Levine and Dr. Fine have spoken about, and which also appealed to me so much, was expressed in this prayer that Pope John recited every day. Perhaps it provides us a clue to his character. He's prayed, "May everyone be able to say of me that I have never sowed dissension and mistrust, that I have never grieved any immortal soul by engendering suspicion or fear, that I have been frank, loyal, and trusting, that I have looked into the eyes of others with brotherly sympathy, even into those of persons who do not share my ideas, so as not to hinder the realization of the greatest commandment of Jesus, that they may be one." The successor of Pope John is Pope Paul VI, who is endeavoring to carry on the great beginnings started by Pope John. We wish him every success, and we hope that this program and the Challenge Tour have helped in some small way to achieve for us that unity in the midst of diversity, which we believe is the will of our common Father for all of us.